I made the terrible decision to shave my head and nerf myself for the summer, so instead of going outside with a bald head, I decided to sit in the garage for about 2 months. Thankfully, I made a painting, so it wasn't a huge waste of time, but we are indeed still waiting for my hair to grow back. In the meantime, let's talk about this painting, and I'm going to start it off exactly how I start pretty much every painting off, and that is making my own canvas. I cannot hound this into everyone enough, but the quality is just so much better. Unfortunately, it is sometimes a giant pain in the ass, but I swear it's worth it. I did have to stretch this one like 3 or 4 times off camera. You won't see that. It'll just look like I flawlessly did it the first time. That's by design. I could not get this thing tight enough, and despite the fast track to carpal tunnel, I do think it's worth it just because I like if I take a commercial canvas, I can usually just shove my thumb through it, and there's no chance you get me to dump 300-400 hours into a painting that I can shove my thumb through. All of that is besides the point. I do use metal stretcher frames, and I know a lot of people were asking me where I get them. I just get them on Blick.com. Unfortunately, the center support beams for them are of pretty low quality. You didn't see it in my last video, but I had the same exact system, except I had bought the internal like beams, and I ended up snapping one in half while I was stretching the canvas last time. So I just opted to build my own in this case. It wasn't too hard. I had access to a bunch of tools at my friend's house. He was just showing me how to do that. Never made that joint before. I think it came out pretty perfectly though. This is where the hell ensues. You're supposed to use PVA glue. You're supposed to put it on the canvas prior to stretching it just because it can tend to loosen the canvas, but it just was still loosening it every time. I think I might just go back to Raviskin glue after this just because it might not be as quote-unquote archival, but who really knows? At least it has like, you can see exactly how it deteriorates, and it's like proven over time, versus PVA is just so annoying. Like, it's really nice to be able to like kind of half-ass stretch a canvas and then just hit it with a bunch of rabbit skin glue, because then it just tightens up like a drum immediately with very little effort, where this was like a war for 3 days straight, and my hands hurt so bad. Even after fighting with this thing for like 3-4 days straight, I still couldn't get it as tight as I wanted to, so I ended up just using an acrylic gesso instead of an oil ground, just because I've in the past had experience of that tightening up the canvas, and it did surprisingly work quite well, except I had a very different surface than I'm used to. And just quickly to rehash the difference between acrylic and oil-based ground is one is obviously acrylic, the other is oil. The acrylic one tends to be slightly more absorbent, so it will pull some of the oil out of paint into the canvas, and you can kind of get like dead spots on your painting, which are kind of like unfun to look at. They do go away once you varnish the painting, but that only solves it at the end really. But oil-based ground tends to just be smoother. The oil paint doesn't absorb into it as much, so it more sits up on the surface, so you get slightly more saturated colors, less deadening of the colors, and it's also just like your paint goes a little bit further just based on the smoothness of it. It tends to glide on top of it versus getting like absorbed or like pushed into the canvas. It's really a minor change. It's just something I have like taught myself and started using. It did change this process slightly. If you watched my previous video, you may have noticed that I wiped away the underdrawing. I find that it's a little bit harder to do that on an acrylic ground. You can still do it. It's not that big of a deal. I just prefer it on an oil ground. It almost goes way back to white, versus acrylic, it just leaves this like ugly smear look. And I ended up just letting that first layer dry, and now I'm going over it again with a drawing. A couple more days, but same result in the end. The result being a block in stage. I am not doing a heavily detailed drawing. I'm mostly just getting the general shapes down, like the largest shapes. Like I have like the entire head blocked into one shape, the entire trash can's one shape, the wall's one shape, just blocking things in the most simple you can see them. And that comes with training, but also it's not super hard. It's just a way of thinking in terms of big blocks of color, because then you can go in and cover the entire canvas immediately with these giant blocks of color, like not really paying much attention to minute shifts in value in each of them, because that can all come later, but it's much easier to change and move things around in this giant block-in stage, because it's way easier to compare your drawing or your reference photo to your painting when you have these big blocks of color. You can be like, oh, this one's a little bit too big, that's slightly too narrow, this angle is slightly off. It's just way easier to edit than it is to just scale and draw perfectly the first time. So this has become my new process. Just block this thing in and cover the entire canvas as fast as I possibly can. It's also a much more freeing process. Like, you don't have to be very specific. You know this underdrawing is going to be very inaccurate, semi-inaccurate. You know there's going to be issues, so you get less like committed to each thing. So you're just focused on being like filling it in. And the faster and more you're just like, what am I trying to say? The faster and more confident you are at filling in these areas, the more that is going to transfer into like the energy and the brushwork that you're doing. Also, take everything I say with a grain of salt. Nothing is like a set in stone method. And I feel like my painting method changes like so much between each painting, let alone I'm just trying to like talk about and break down what I'm doing in each painting. So again, take everything with a grain of salt. This isn't like the correct or the only way to do anything. It's just a way that I found creates a nice result. And right now I'm enjoying it. I'm sure I'll change it up again in a month from now, but just keep experimenting, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And on that note, I've been doing this voiceover for about an hour and I have about 6 minutes of it done. So I'm going to go watch House of the Dragon episode 7. You won't be able to tell, but I'm going to go absorb great television in the next 2 seconds. Alrighty, that was fantastic. Shout out Sky Puppies. I think I still like my cat more, but that's my friend Nat. I'm actually teaching her how to paint. If you happen to see, I don't know if any shots made it in, but on the right-hand side of the canvas, there's a portrait of, I believe, Juan de Paria. Sorry that if I butchered that, by Velasquez, and I'm having her break that down. So she's kind of in the background working off to the right. I think at this point I have the entire block in ready and I've kind of just adjusted things here and there, and now I'm going in with a second layer. I'm making sure to follow a fat over lean. The first layer was entirely thinned out with Gamsol, and this second layer that you now see me layering over and drawing over is 50% oil and then 50% Gamsol. And as I continue forward with the painting, I add more and more oil up until the point where I switch over to walnut oil because it dries slower than linseed oil. Once you have your block-in stage complete, it's nice to take a giant reference photo of the entire painting, try and get as little glare as you possibly can, and then you can kind of layer that next to your drawings / reference photos / whatever you're working with in order to create your painting. And you can go back and forth and be like, okay, this area needs to change a little bit, this area needs to change a little bit. And it's just a very helpful tool because you can see them side by side in exactly perfect scale. And it just gives you the next foundation to create this next layer where you can correct parts of this drawing that are incorrect. And it's a little bit easier because it's really hard to draw and scale at the same time. And it's counterproductive. It's really hard to do. So I recommend just like going back and forth between your reference photo, almost like a manual projector in a way. If you've ever wondered how like mural artists create like almost perfectly rendered things at like ginormous scales in the side of buildings, that's exactly how they do it. They use basically a method where they'll just sketch a bunch of letters across the entire board, take a photo of that, and then layer their sketch over it, and it will just give them a reference point where that's exactly what I'm doing with my block-in stage. I'm using that as a reference to build off of and then shifting things left and right. It's pretty much a gridding method where if you've ever seen anyone like grid a photo and then grid their canvas and use the grid as a reference point, I'm doing the exact same thing with the block-in stage. At this point, it may look like I'm starting to detail and render certain sections of the painting, and while I'm more doing it in a sense of the exact same thing I was doing before. I'm blocking in smaller sections of the painting, where like at first, the first pass was just block in big shapes, and now at this second stage where I'm doing a second layer of the whole thing, I'm pretty much doing the exact same thing, except I'm taking each of those shapes and breaking them down into smaller shapes. And I just keep doing this. That is the process that I use to create a painting. It's just this continuous breakdown of large shape to smaller shape to smaller shape to smaller shape. And eventually you come up with a fully rendered painting. Now, the paintings that I go for tend to be very loose, but also not loose. Like I only want things to be super rendered and super detailed in areas that I want your eye to focus on. And then I leave the rest of the painting like open. And this is a great way of doing that. I feel like I'm explaining it poorly, that I'm not covering the entire canvas again and again and again, bringing it up. I'm leaving areas where if you look at the final painting, a lot of that first layer, that first block in is still there. It's still not not covered at all. And a lot of this second layer is still not covered at all. And I usually get 3, maybe 4, very occasionally 5 layers into an area that I want to be the full focus of the painting. For say, like in this case, it would be her face and the hand that's reaching over the stove. And those areas get more and more detail because they're important parts of the painting, where like the feet, I think I almost leave this foot exactly as you see it now. And it's very loose. It's not like super rendered, but I think that makes for a better painting in the end. I think scale plays a huge role in this as well, more so than people would think, or at least that's something I've been thinking about recently, is that the larger your painting is, the less detailed you have to get, because you have to view the painting further away in order to absorb the entire thing. So the larger a painting is, the more freeing it is in the sense of like detail. Like you don't have to detail something like crazy if it's also massive, because you can step away from it and then your eye does something fun called optical mixing, where it will blend things together and it can only really focus exactly where you're looking. So everything becomes almost like fully realistic without having to put that much time and detail into every single part of the painting. There's also a second side to this, like kind of a negative, that it's very hard to stay loose with a large painting just because you don't have the same the largeness of each of your brushes. Like if you're painting something that's like 12 by 12, like a small painting, you can kind of create that looseness and that like gestural aspect of a painting just based on the fact of you using larger and larger brushes. Like if you try and create a really small painting with large brushes, your work is going to automatically become very expressive. You almost lose that entirely when you're working with large paintings, unless you were using like a fucking broom or something in order to paint this. Like that's what the scale would be in comparison. So you have to create other ways in order to keep that looseness and that gestural aspect of your work. So I've just found that the less you detail and the less you're serious about each section of the painting, and you only bring up the areas that you really, really need to, you just end up with a fantastic piece of I don't know, an artwork, I guess, without the complication of like just nitpicky sections here and there. Because we're trying to, or at least I'm trying to avoid that photorealistic look, where I am using a reference photo in this. I'm using a photo that I took in New York like 3-4 years ago, but I'm not trying to like copy the photo exactly. I want to create the same essence and like bring that like feeling that I have from the photo without jeopardizing the quality of the fact that it's a painting, not a photo. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to like take the beauty of someone like, say someone like Sargent, and try and like mix it with the modern technologies that we have today, like a photograph or like a projector or like anything in between, like some kind of like this new modern technology that some people view as like cheating, but I feel like that it allows me to create paintings and create scenes of things that you wouldn't be able to capture otherwise, I guess. For instance, this isn't a scene that I would have been able to pose and set up, like paint from life for 3, 4, 5 weeks straight. It just wouldn't have been possible. So I'm using modern technology, but I'm also trying to capture like the beauty of like not having that technology and not having those abilities. So it's like, how can I mesh that in this world that I enjoy making? Like it's part of my process at this point. Like, I don't think that I could create the work that I want to make without photographic references, because all of the things that I'm drawn to and all of the things that I look at, I'm like, oh, that would make a great painting, always are like these like split second like captures of scenes and like little bits of my life that they wouldn't translate back to painting. Like I've tried to pose things before and they just never come out as good. So it's like, how do I create a painting that's compelling and still like is true to the essence of painting without jeopardizing like the freedom that we have today? Alrighty, now that we are approaching the end of the painting, I'm starting to realize that there is one large issue that just doesn't really make sense and I'm not super happy with. I'm going to hound this into you again. If you do not like something, change it. And I really like how the whole painting's coming out, but this hand something's not working there. So we went back to the drawing board. I pulled my couch over to the wall and kind of set up my camera in a pretty similar place. And then I had my friend sit here and pose. This is just me right now, but she came over dressed in the same clothes, and then I kind of hodgepodged the right hand together with the reference using like a bunch of different references. After I found something that I liked, I sent it to a few friends just to like double check to make sure all the anatomy made sense, and they gave me some feedback, changed it a few more times, and then I just went to town on the painting and chopped that first hand off and just started painting right over. Now, when you make large changes like this to a painting, you tend to just break 6 other things, so I ended up kind of like stop recording just because I was having so much difficulty trying to like mesh this in with the rest of the painting, as all of the colors and the reference were different. So it ended up taking a lot longer than I thought it was going to, but I think in the end it was the right decision, and I think it made the painting just much stronger for it in the end. And that's the entire thing. Only one thing left to do, and that is to sign the corner and hang it in my living room and stare at it until I hate it, which so far has not happened. I think this might be one of the best things I've ever made. Final dimensions came out to 93 inches by 63 inches, and that's the whole thing. So thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate it. I've been trying to take this whole YouTube thing a little bit more seriously, so I think my next video will probably be out in about a month, and I'm going to try and do 30 paintings in 30 days. So I'll see you then. Peace. Thank you. Also, if you want to support me in any other way, you can buy prints on my website, and then any of those paintings that I'm going to start doing in the next few weeks are going to be just rolling out as I make them on my website. So that'll be the best chance to grab one of them. Huge thanks. Peace.